steps to reducing nutrients to reduce red tide. This will be provided by Dr. Mary Lusk from the University of Florida Gulf Coast Research and Education Center. Next slide. Purpose is to provide an overview of current ongoing research at the University of Florida Urban Soil and Water Quality Lab focused on watershed drivers that control the timing, magnitude, variability, and impact of nutrient transport in urban landscapes. And the connection to our CCMP is that this relates to water quality improvement priority actions. I will now turn this over to you, Dr. Lusk. Thank you for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much for having me today. I am really excited to be here and to present this presentation to the group that's here today. We've had some wonderful talks this morning about Karenia brevis and its physiology, and we learned a lot about how it's using nutrients in the environment. My work looks at nutrients at the landscape scale, so nutrients that are coming from lawns and homes and neighborhoods, residential communities. So I'm trying to figure out where nutrients are coming from and where they're going, because we know that those nutrients can be fueling and prolonging these red tide outbreaks that we have sometimes. So let me go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. So I went around my urban neighborhood in the Tampa Bay area and took some pictures. And I took these pictures in about 10 minutes. I took pictures of ways that urban residential areas can contribute nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, to urban waters. And I'll just start in the upper left-hand corner there, kind of go through and talk about each of these images a little bit. So upper left-hand corner there, we've got the downspout. Directing water from the roof to the driveway. And I see this a lot, and I really wish we didn't have this a lot, because what's happening here is we're taking water from the rooftop and we're just diverting that to the driveway, diverting it to an impervious surface. That water can't infiltrate into the soil. It runs down the driveway, goes right to the street, and becomes part of the stormwater flow that goes to our local water bodies, like perhaps Hillsborough River or Alafaya River or Peace River, Chattahoochee. All of those surface water bodies eventually collect that runoff. And that water that's coming from the roof can have nitrogen and phosphorus in it from material on the roof, or just rainfall itself has nitrogen and phosphorus in it. So that water is certainly going to have some load of nutrients in it. Underneath that, you see a sprinkler head sprinkling some water, irrigating a lawn in an urban residential setting. You also see on the sidewalk some water that's hitting the sidewalk that's beginning to go over impervious surfaces a little bit in the community. If that water is reclaimed water, and many of our communities in this part of Florida do use reclaimed water for irrigation, then that reclaimed water often has elevated levels of nitrogen and phosphorus in it. And it's fine if that's hitting your lawn and providing a nutrient source to your growing grass or your flower beds. But if that water is flowing down the sidewalks and the streets because the sprinklers are not working the way they should, then that can be a source of nutrients to our urban waters. I have some colleagues in Pasco County that like to say, just wet your plants. So keep those sprinklers tuned so that when water is running from them, that water only hits vegetative surfaces and not the streets and sidewalks where it can be contributing nutrients. In the middle of the screen, we see some leaf litter, some grass clippings in an urban stormwater drain. See that a lot, especially around March, February, March every year when those live oak trees start to drop their leaves. You can have huge loads of leaf litter in our stormwater networks, and we've done studies in our lab that show that material, if it's allowed to sit there, will continue to leach nitrogen and phosphorus into the stormwater even a year afterwards. So definitely that can be a problem for us. In the top right-hand corner, those two top images were side by side. One is a lawn that has a very poor standing turf grass on it. And then right adjacent to that in the street, you can see the soil that has eroded from that lawn and is accumulating in the street and in the gutters that convey stormwater through the neighborhood. And I always tell people that bare dirt lawn that you see there, I'm more scared of that than I am a fertilized lawn from a nutrient transport perspective, because soil has a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus in it, and that eroded soil is going to carry nutrients into the stormwater network. So really, the take-home message there is keep our urban areas vegetative, with vegetative cover. It doesn't have to be turf grass. It can be the other things. And if you are interested in learning more about that, the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program, run by University of Florida IFAS Extension, has wonderful recommendations for that, be it turf or turf alternatives. They can help you put the right plant in the right place. In this neighborhood, there's a lot of shade, so it's hard to keep a healthy stand of turf grass, but there are plants that we could put there to protect that soil and prevent erosion and prevent those nutrients from ending up in the street and the stormwater network. Underneath that image is a picture of some compacted urban soil. It's hard to tell from the picture that it's compacted, but we see this a lot in residential areas. And you think about the construction process in a residential area, big equipment, building those homes, lots of big trucks and bulldozers and things running over that soil. It gets very compacted. And by the time that home is built, the soil is not in a very good shape. The homeowner moves in, and a couple weeks go by, and the grass isn't as green as they would like it to be, and they think, oh, well, I better fertilize and water it. But that's really not the problem. The problem is that soil is so compacted from the construction process that nothing can grow in it very well. And so a great way to reduce nutrient loading to our urban residential areas is to take care of the soil better. Before homeowners move in and after construction, go in and incorporate some compost or some mulch into that soil, break it up and help loosen it up so that we can grow plants better in it, and we don't have to add so much fertilizer and water. And then finally, in the bottom picture, of course, is the pet waste station. And pet waste, of course, can be the source of nutrients to our urban waters. And I've definitely seen that in my studies and the research that we've done. From University of Florida, from my lab, we have been able to go out and collect water samples and find traces of indicators of pet waste in those waters. And we know that pet waste have a large load of nitrogen and phosphorus in it. Okay, so next slide. This research talks about some work that we've done in the Hillsborough and Manatee County areas. This would be very similar to the Charlotte Harbor area. These were the neighborhoods that were involved in the study were single and multifamily home communities in urban areas. And we went in over a course of a rainy season and collected stormwater samples from the community and analyze those for nutrients, for nitrogen and phosphorus. And then another test that we did with that was called isotopic characterization of the nitrate nitrogen. And that allows us to, for lack of a better way of putting it, look at the fingerprint of that nitrogen. And by looking at the fingerprint of it, we can make assumptions and estimations about where that nitrate nitrogen came from. And we plot the isotopic values of that nitrate in a plot like the one you see on the right. And where it falls on that plot gives us a pretty good indicator of the pathways and processes that have created that particular nitrogen ion in the environment and where it came from. So if it plots up there at the top in that blue area that says atmospheric NOx, then that nitrate nitrogen likely just came from rainfall. It's from the atmosphere. And again, in our part of Florida, we have a lot of nitrogen just in rainfall. If it's down there in the bottom in the green area, then we can assume that it came from ammonia fertilizer, or in the yellow area, then it's originating from soil. If it's over on the bottom right-hand side in the red area, it is most likely sourced from manure or septic systems. Manure can include pet waste. So you see here in this example that almost all of the samples that we collected came from that upper top part of the graph, indicating a large percentage of that nitrate nitrogen just coming from the atmosphere. Again, just from rain itself, having a lot of nitrogen in it. And then a little bit of signature associated with fertilizers and soils, and one or two that showed manure again, which was probably pet waste. But if you look at the bottom numbers there on this graph, greater than 50% of the nitrate nitrogen in this stormwater that we saw was coming from the atmosphere, and then with about less than 20% coming from those other sources, including fertilizers and soils. Okay, next slide. In another study that was done in Hillsborough County, this was in a likewise in an urban residential community. You can see an aerial shot of it down there on the bottom right hand side of the slide, and then a map on the left side. All the little green squares are home sites. Little blue circles on that are stormwater inlets in the streets, and it's just showing how water, all the water in that residential area flows down the streets and it goes into those little blue inlets in the streets and all connects up in the pond that you see there on the far left side of that map. We were able to collect stormwater right before it goes into that pond, and during a summer rainy season, and think about where it comes from, and again do some isotopic characterization. And in that case, much of the nitrogen that went into that pond was sourced from leaf litter and grass clippings. And you can see from the aerial image of this neighborhood that it does have a very nice tree canopy. And trees are wonderful. We need trees, and I absolutely advocate for trees in our community. But times of the year, they do drop those leaves and contribute a lot of mass of material to the streets. And that can definitely be a source of nitrogen and phosphorus to the stormwater, and nitrogen and phosphorus just continues and makes its way on through. After it leaves that pond, it's usually released to a stream, which eventually makes its way out to the bay and to the estuaries. Okay, next slide. This study was done in California, so it was not done in Florida, but I absolutely believe that we see similar things in Florida, and I am in the process right now of doing a similar study in Florida on the East Coast. Hopefully that work will be published very soon. But let me just explain what's going on in this study. So this is a neighborhood, a residential community that uses reclaimed water to irrigate the public areas, and then potable water is used to irrigate individual home sites. And in this study, you see some definite ups and downs, up and down in these peaks. So the peaks are showing total nitrogen in runoff by time. And they're really high in the community when the community was irrigating public areas with reclaimed water. And they're at low points during the times when individual homeowners were irrigating their lawns with potable water. So you're seeing the contrast here between reclaimed water runoff versus potable water runoff, and reclaimed water being at the high peak, so much higher. So again, just this message that reclaimed water, which is former wastewater, it's been treated, but the treatment process cannot remove all of the nitrogen and phosphorus. And so that water can be a source of nutrients. And we absolutely need to use reclaimed water in Florida to offset potable use of groundwater, but we need to do so wisely and keep those sprinklers from hitting the streets and sidewalks. Next slide. Okay, so just go ahead and I've got some animations in this slide. Go ahead and just keep going. All right, right there. So let me sum up with some results of our research and management implications for this audience. So first of all, multiple end sources, including the atmosphere, pet waste, soils, as possible possibilities for nutrient sources in urban waters, and implications of that. Think about how important it is to prevent soil erosion from our urban landscapes, to implement practices like street sweeping, and to get that leaf litter and grass clippings off of the streets. Pet waste management, it seems like a small thing, but it can make a big difference. And then remember that just rainfall has nitrogen and phosphorus in it. So a wonderful thing to do is to have green infrastructure practices, or things like rain gardens or permeable surfaces, vegetated surfaces in our landscapes that can collect that rainwater and let it filter naturally through soils instead of running off and becoming runoff. Secondly, one of the things that our research does is put nitrogen forms in context with each other. So by forms, I mean like inorganic versus organic. In stormwater in this part of the state, we see that a lot of our stormwater nitrogen is in an organic form. Again, coming from things like grass clippings, leaf litter, the atmosphere. So keep that in mind, that we have a lot of organic nitrogen that we need to address. Finally, number 3 is sources of nitrate in the studies that we've looked at are usually atmosphere being the prominent source, followed by organic matter, followed by fertilizers. So we always make the point that we need more than fertilizer bans, fertilizer ordinances. Those ordinances address an important thing for us, but they're not the end all of everything. There's still nutrient sources that we need to address, and we need to keep that in mind. Next slide. Yeah, keep going. Okay, so I'm going to skip down for the purposes of time. I'm going to skip down to just 3, again, just to summarize about reclaimed water being a potential nutrient source to stormwater, and really the need that we have for best management practices and community education on smart irrigation. In Manatee County, I know one of the programs that the Extension Office provides there is going out to people's homes and teaching them how to set those sprinkler heads so that they're not watering the streets and sidewalks. That's a wonderful thing to do and a great way to reduce that nutrient output to our stormwater network. Okay, next slide. That was it. Very short and sweet. I will be happy to take a few questions, but thank you for your time today. My email address and Twitter handle are there. Absolutely feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you, Dr. Lusk. It was a great presentation, and it just as it, you know, what's on my mind right now, Commissioner White, I think you might have triggered this. It's just all the different causal relationships and how this presentation fits in with the 2 past ones that we saw too. And it just makes me think of the analogy of, you know, a snowflake doesn't cause an avalanche, but avalanches can cause problems, and they're made of snowflakes. And so it's appreciate all the information you're sharing on all the different contributions that we can be mindful of what can be done to minimize impact and duration of red tide. We've got time for questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to share?
I have, please. This is Jack Bispham from Swift Mud.
Go ahead,
Dr. Is it Lusk?
Yes.
Does anybody ever compare, when you said that the stormwater ponds are exporter of nitrogen, okay? Does anybody ever compare a community that was, say, built maybe 30 years ago that doesn't have the stormwater retention ponds versus what they build now? And we're seeing an implosion of it taking place in Florida. Which one are we better off? Which kind of development? Anybody ever ask you that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm not aware of any studies that have compared the 2 types of development, but I think that would be a really worthwhile thing to do. I do know that there are over 76,000 stormwater ponds in Florida. And I also know that they do a very poor job of removing nitrogen. They do a little bit better at phosphorus, but nitrogen on average, they only remove about 30% of the nitrogen that goes into them. And it would take me probably another 20 minutes to talk about the whys of that. It just has to do with nitrogen chemistry. So, you know, I mean, these ponds, they're put in for flood protection primarily, which they do a very good job of, but they're very poor removers of nutrients. And we need to keep that in mind that, you know, we can't expect, you know, we tend to think, oh, the water goes in the pond and then it comes out and everything's hunky-dory, and really it's just not the case. Sadly, it's not.
Okay, so what the next deal, I guess we need to do some research on how to, you know, reduce that nitrogen in those ponds. You know, they mitigate all the wetland species and everything. And people have the fuzzy feeling that these are removing the nitrogen, but I know it doesn't. But now we do need to figure out how we can do a better job. I would agree with that.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the projects that we're working on right now is looking at the effects of planting the littoral zones of those ponds and see if vegetative plants can help remove some of those nutrients. But you know, one of the best things too is just to start at the home level, at the community level, and implement a lot of those best practices, like you know, taking care of the grass clippings and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I would agree, because you've seen hundreds of homes being built with this model of these stormwater ponds and, you know, mitigation areas and you know, native plantings and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know, we had, it was just last time we had some updates on some stormwater issues, and we better get on the stick here. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yes, this is Jennifer Hecker. I just wanted to interject that I actually spent 3 years on a statewide stormwater technical advisory committee about a decade ago. DEP was aware that our stormwater standards in Florida hadn't been updated and that nitrogen was not getting removed at the levels needed to control increasing nitrogen levels in downstream waters. And so they had worked on trying to update those regulations across the state. Those never got adopted. And then there were many years where that didn't progress, but they have resurrected that. And there is currently a statewide stormwater technical advisory committee, and they are working on trying to do just what you all are discussing and describing, which is create best management practice treatment train approaches that use a combination of other things in addition to wet retention detention ponds to more effectively reduce nitrogen. So just wanted to let you guys know that that is something that that I think we briefed people on briefly at the stormwater meeting that we had, but it continues, and we're hopeful that that will bring our standards up to make them more effective.
Yeah.
We've got time for one more question.
Well, just a comment that the Barancic Foundation gave our Extension Department a $50,000 grant to kind of study this, and they're putting together best practices for pond management manual right now. But they went out also and did a lot of plantings and other things along with those guidelines, and they've had a remarkable level of success in removing nitrogen with some simple techniques, not mowing down all the way to the edge, and some plantings. And so I think there's some good work being done to help with that issue.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lusk. Thank you for your presentation and the dialogue afterwards.